Okay. Um, what can I say? These articles they come from apparently study centers from the US or from any other country, really. It's not about where they come from, more what they say. Generally do not entertain me too much, especially not to the extent of me wanting to comment on some of the nonsensical topics that I see. But this one really caught my attention. I've nothing to say about the author. I mean, the author is clearly incompetent, but the topics and the points that she makes to try to find a way to justify why Australia and fundamentally no other country aside from China should pursue sovereignty in AI are really incredible. So let's go through this article. Let's dissect it bit by bit. I read it all, took plenty of notes as well. It took me a solid hour to go through this article twice to try to find an item that I could agree on, but unfortunately, guys, I could not agree on anything. So there is the executive summary, but I'll touch on some of the topics that are part of the article, which, again, feel free to read at your own leisure. So first of all, the thing that the access to frontier AI is a prerequisite for Australia's prosperity. I would say this is not a prerequisite. This is already happening. So Australia has already access to all the models they want. They can have access to closed source models if they want to, but especially they have access to all the open source models just like anyone else does. And by open source models, I mean state of the art like Kimi K3, Quen 3.8, DeepSeek. We have recently at Tooth Fairy launched DeepSeek V4 Flash, the latest version. Soon we will also enable Quen 3.8 27B. So I'm not sure what this writer is talking about, this researcher, but Australia has already all the prerequisites and clearly doesn't need anyone to give these prerequisites away. Australia has not reckoned with its dependence on the United States for frontier AI access. No, I think they did. I think we had already a taste of what that means, especially when Mythos 5, that was so powerful that could not be shared with the entire planet, was then banned from anyone but US citizens on US soil, with the embarrassing contradiction that even top-tier labs could not give access to the models that they created because they had people that were not American citizens working for Anthropic, which is obviously the paradox of these politicians to do not understand much, but they make decisions using their guts rather than their intellect. So yeah, but coming back to Australia, we did have the reckoning, and many people have realized, hang on a second, shall I depend on someone that can take away the models from me in less than 3 hours? And many people started reflecting on it. So in a sense, thank you for clarifying more than we could ever done how Australia cannot just depend on the US and in general on closed source models providers coming from the west coast of the United States. Australia has no credible path to AI self-sufficiency. I would say there is no argument about this. The only thing that matters is actions. I'm going to give an unbiased opinion here. At least I'll try my best, considering that I run an AI company. But I would say that, hey guys, you need to negotiate with us with better terms, because I know for a fact that pro capita we spend a lot of money with US companies. So again, probably the author of this article has never really worked in AI, and it's very clear. And then there is also a targeted investment, which I would agree. When I read the first line, I thought, okay, targeted investment, great. At least we agree on one thing. And then we start talking of critical minerals that would have to be given to the US, and then the US gives us back the higher value implementation of what a mineral, quote unquote, silicon can do for us, by essentially letting us dig while they do the added value part, which is, I don't see how this is actually going towards Australians' interests, if that makes sense. Then, without spending too much time going through the entire document, that I strongly recommend you to read with probably a glass of wine or something that really helps your brain digest all this stuff. She starts talking about these Australian AI capabilities are less sophisticated than its adversaries. What is adversaries? Oh, so sorry, maybe we're talking about China, yeah? That's fine. Funny enough, the adversary is giving away their own AI models to us for free. So it might be an adversary in certain aspects, but if we contextualize this to the AI industry, I'm really struggling to understand who the adversary is here. Because I would say that the adversary instead is someone that takes it away with no apparent reason but your citizenship. That's what I would say is an adversary, right? Let alone the fact that the very same players that are supposed to be adversaries are the ones that have given HuggingFace that got hacked by OpenAI because of this apparent Astra model that is too powerful to be released, that by mistake, quote unquote, because obviously we all believe that it was all a mistake, yeah? Hacked into HuggingFace, and then HuggingFace, to control this cybersecurity breach, couldn't use Anthropic or OpenAI models because they are cybersecurity nerfed, and it had to use instead, guess what? A Chinese open source models to protect itself from the attack of an ally from their own soil. Interesting. They don't say this in this article because it deletes completely their point of cybersecurity fear mongering, but that's exactly what happened. Also, they say that for national security and economic prosperity, China is not a realistic source. Geopolitical alignment and security concern effectively foreclose the option for the national security and economic deployments that matter most. Now, out of all this, no one in the AI industry, including myself, that have always shared that China has contributed much more than the US to the AI industry in terms of academic papers. No one really believes that China is just our friend. At the same time, though, I would just like to remove this veil of apparent we are on the same side kind of thing with the US too. You should not rely just on China. You should not rely just on the US. You should just not rely on anyone. In a social economy, in the social economy that we live in today, where all nations and countries are interconnected and industries as well are interconnected, it doesn't make sense to rely on any of those under any condition. Now the fact that we cannot go with China, then we need to go to the US, which is ultimately like the bad as much as the other, really doesn't make any sense. We also apparently have to rethink what AI sovereignty is, because the author says we cannot build self-sufficiency. So give up on the idea. This industry has basically skyrocketed in the last 3 years and a half for what generative AI is. I know that the AI industry existed from the 1950s, the Turing test and things like that. You don't have to give me the lesson. I'm just saying that it has become mainstream now in the last 3 years and a half. Okay. Apparently, after 3 years, we've already realized we cannot be self-sufficient. So this is a determination that you make in 36 months, which in the AI field, we would call a very biased opinion. Yeah. There are challenges in terms of AI sovereignty in Australia. I'm the first one that says we need more compute, we need more talent, we need more support, we need more government involvement when it comes to protecting the interest of local AI companies. I've always said it. Do I think that we have challenges? Yes. Do I think it's going to be difficult? Yes. Do I think we should give up just because it's challenging? No. And there are so many reasons why you would want to give up on this approach. Not because you want to necessarily compete with the best. That's definitely something that we want to do, but it's not the reason. The reason is to give people alternatives and choices. And if Australia does it and other countries do it, and I know that other European countries are trying to follow this very same approach, there is a chance that we will have not to depend on anyone, but to leverage everyone's ideas to create a more balanced AI ecosystem that is not bipolar, or like these authors would like to see it. monopolar, US driven. Okay. Yes, then there is a topic that she discusses around the national investment of AI. I've already shared my opinion when it comes to how the government should invest money. But anyway, that's not the topic of the discussion today. And also the apparent thing that having access to open source and open weights model doesn't really give Australia any fundamental edge. The reason is that, first of all, these open source models or open weights models, obviously there is a difference between the two, but let's call them open source, although the author on this thing didn't make a mistake. Maybe she talked to Claude Fable 5 for half an hour to come up with this conclusion, but they are in most cases open weights, okay, because they don't share the full recipe, but they just share the weights. Having said that, how much do you think that these open source or open weights models are trailing behind the US? Based on my observations, and I think I'm entitled to say that I check basically all the open source models available, they trail behind the US models by 30 days. Which company or organization changes models in a 30 days time frame? Companies make decisions in semesters timeframes. The fact that there is an open source model that is trailing slightly behind closed source models, no one really cares. You should see that companies still use Llama 3.370b, a model that is 24 months old, and they're perfectly happy with it. So this thing that we need to be always on the frontier is absolutely false. No company that we work with could care less of always using the latest and greatest open source, closed source model. As long as it works, they actually preference another thing, stability. And anyone that has worked in a business agrees with what I'm saying. If instead you are a Twitter warrior or X warrior or LinkedIn troll, whatever, keep believing that everyone is always chasing the best closed source, open source model, whatever that is. That's simply not true. Also, apparently, the author highlights that on-premise closed weight models carry a dependency, which is the renewed access and transfer, which now apparently is something that we need to be concerned of, although it's a point for better negotiation. So you can negotiate with me for the renewal and the transfer of my intellectual property that simply means I'm going to make you more and more enslaved to the technology that you will never be able to build, because in the meantime, I'm basically destroying your entire AI ecosystem. But at the same time, I'm happy to come to the negotiating table and discuss with you conditions to give you this renewal access to models and things like that. If I'm sounding like someone that probably you have heard of, that is the, how does he define himself apart from all the trolling and things like that? I think he's the king of negotiation, the master of negotiation. That really much sounds like that. And then also, it seems that this risk will get more and more compounded by the fact that as Australia becomes a smaller and smaller market for the larger players that want to provide inference to the entire planet, we will become less and less valuable. Assuming that in Australia, there are the only smart people that are thinking that maybe there is a much more sustainable and organic way to grow AI, which does not rely on the US or China. It relies on a wide range of opportunities to either consume inference or consume models, which means that there is no reason to believe that there is going to be one player that will dominate the model consumption. Just to give you some stats on this, if you go on OpenRouter right now and you check what are the models that consume the highest amount of tokens, which it's the unit of consumption that we all use to define how much something is used in the AI space. Again, talking about generative AI between LLMs and VLMs, the highest consumption models are all Chinese, the top 5. So believing that these models will be served by the US only, so Australia should be careful in the negotiation process, is just not factually true, because the market has already shifted away from these closed source models. And people that say, there are many people that are still using these quote unquote state of the art closed source models because we like to believe that those are the state of the art closed source and they are truly the best models. Are, in my opinion, using in many cases, the models that they are used to, the harnesses that they are used to for simple inertia, which is perfectly fine. I'm not disputing that this is human nature. I do the same thing. But at the same time, factually, you cannot say that there is the absolute necessity to use a certain type of models or not. That's simply not what's happening. And the benchmarks, let alone what we actually see in the market, clearly proves what I'm saying. Also, and this is probably the part where, again, it seems that there is some fear mongering where you go, okay, maybe in 2028, 2029, we're going to make $1 trillion in revenue. So that means that all the investment that you've made, it will make sense. But you have to wait until 2028, 2029. On a similar note, this our author is basically claiming, look, for now, the market is good for consumers. In the future, the providers will actually do what we call rug pull, which is something invented by the Silicon Valley. Sorry, or probably also others, but definitely Silicon Valley mastered this technique where they give an asset or a service at a very low price in the beginning. And then once they reach critical market adoption, they start increasing prices because they know that in the meantime, they've vacuumed the entire space from any competitor and they can apply whatever price they want within reason, because in the meantime, there are going to be another 2 or 3 companies still coming from the US that might have played the same game. But ultimately, is a game that they play within their own confinement. And this is something that you see across the board with all the Web 2.0 tech, such as social media, search engines, office products. There are only a few examples of products for productivity that we use in businesses today that don't come from the US. I'm talking only Western societies now. And this is the reason. There are many good products that have been built over time, but unfortunately, they've been taken away from the needed oxygen to grow and build their own products further. And then ultimately, they either failed or they got acquired. Now, if you think that I'm the only one that understood that this is the pattern that they use, you will be mistaken. Many founders that I talk to know exactly the game that they're playing. Again, if you understood what they do, you also know how to counteract to this kind of behavior. And going dramatically cheap is the way you bypass the problem, because even if they try to apply ridiculously low prices, if you can defeat them on even lower prices that are dramatically lower, 10x lower, which is exactly what DeepSeek is doing against OpenAI and Anthropic, there is a barrier under which they cannot go, because okay, that they can burn through 20, 25 billions of dollars per year, but they also need to prove to the investors that at some point they will be able to reach market share. Right now, they are burning through money and they are losing market share. And this is the way they're getting defeated. So if your concern is that these companies at some point will dominate the market and they will do the massive rug pull to you, just keep in mind, this is what they would like you to believe, but the market has already shifted away from this. And many AI companies, including mine, are really not concerned about this fear mongering. Okay. Then there is also this point in relation to the fact that all these Australian inference providers naming names that I'm not going to give the author the publicity for, it's just complete pity. Like the fact that you prove by saying we have AWS that is serving the Australian government, which means automatically that Australia should give up on cloud, which then means that Australia should give up on inference, then means that Australia should give up on any form of independence because you have already given up on cloud. It's nonsensical. It's like we are going on a wrong trajectory. So because you are on the wrong trajectory, you know what? Continue going down the wrong trajectory. No, it's actually evidence that something must change. So the point made by saying that AWS and Azure are bigger cloud providers than others. Okay, so what? That doesn't mean anything. AI is a new game anyway. It's very capital intensive. There is definitely a relationship with what cloud computing requires, but it's a different game, and people are playing it with different rules too. Okay. And then this part is probably the one where I'm kind of thinking, okay, so if Australia is structurally reliant on the United States, building Australian own AI capabilities must be the answer, either through full development of AI models and infrastructure or scaling sovereign compute. But Australia cannot build its way out of dependency on the United States. Okay, so out of everything that I've said, I think I've clearly laid out that I'm not saying that Australia can now build their own hardware, their own chip, their own models, their own harnesses, their own everything, and then be completely isolated from the planet and being on this big island saying we have sovereign AI. No one in the right mind would ever think that way. And I've been traveling all over the world talking about AI with lots of smart founders. No one is seeing sovereignty this way. Sovereignty is the ability of choosing. Then you can dial it up or down depending on how much capital, honestly, you can invest. If there is one thing that is true, at some point there is a cost implication. But sovereignty for me and for many others means I want to be able to choose the model. I want to be able to choose the hardware. I want to be able to host it where I want. And I want to choose the harness. And I want to also know where the data goes. This, as long as it gives you the options, to me, is sovereign enough. Clearly, I would like to be fully sovereign where I live. Maybe some people like it this way, but I want to have my own isolation, my own little paradise where I have everything under control. But realistically, not many people can target that. But the fact that we depend on the United States as a fact, saying, you cannot work your way out of this, you must depend on us, it's a fallacy of intellect and epistemologically false. I guess that this article has really shown me once more how important it is that even a founder like myself, that to be honest, right now it's coding through an AI agent to fix on the front end of the app, has to step up a little bit in terms of public involvement. I'm not great at talking these points. Definitely, I don't have the social media influencer persona, as you might tell, but these articles are damaging a country that I'm not saying should aspire to full sovereignty, but at least building an ecosystem of companies that can work in this field, let alone the fact that this field can create jobs. It doesn't only take jobs away. And you don't want to necessarily have jobs just in mining minerals. Surely you might want those, but you also want jobs that know how to manipulate the minerals to create artifacts that can then be used for technology in general, including AI. So this fact that we need to depend on the US because we cannot depend on China and we cannot think a third possible way is kind of ridiculous. And I'm not sure what the agenda is, although I have an opinion, but it's definitely something that I want to push back on. And I really would like to see a general response from the public because fun fact, this article came from an Australian university, or at least got published together with an Australian university by this United States Study Center, which, okay, makes me cringe a little bit, but it kind of points out that there is some level of national reaction to these articles that need to happen. And I'm happy to be one of those that just speaks out and says the things for what they are. And I'm talking specifically from industry experience, not from what I read on X yesterday. Actually, I'm not even on X. So unfortunately, I can't read Elon Musk propaganda. Apologies for that. Anyway, having said that, I hope that you like this reaction article and yeah, love to know what you think about this. Cheers.